what bothers me are things like Persona. Have you ever played a Persona game?
No, I haven't played it. It's one of those things I've often considered, but it's just kind of with a game that long, you kind of want to
But
sort
it's
of
only long because it wastes your time. You know, going to what you were saying, I think some of the games I've mentioned, I'd really want you to try, Mike, because I think
right.
it would allow you to sort of experience these in like a different side of RPGs, like I was mentioning before.
Yeah,
But everyone says that, and it's such a tropey thing to say. Have you played my RPGs? You'd understand.
yeah,
But I honestly think from some of the things you said, you get an understanding of that it's not. There's sometimes just having that interesting battle system. You want to get into the next fight just to see how well you do.
yeah,
Um, but Persona puts the individual characters and the story at the forefront to the point where it's almost like you're living with them.
yeah,
You spend so much time with them through text messages, through school conversations, before, after work, going on dates with them that has got nothing to do with the actual story. It's just, you know, that I almost. It's almost like they're invading my space. It's like I'm playing a
right.
game here. I'm not trying to marry you. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah, yeah.
Um, I know some people want to marry their characters in. That's the Fire Emblem people I know. But what I'm saying is, I just want to experience the game and find out what the next thing has happened. When you slow me down and stop me from doing that because I need to, you know, drop somebody's plant off to them down the
Yeah.
road or do something mundane like that. That's the opposite, where they've put too much character into it. I don't need to know what their favorite color on a cat is, or what pencil they used in science class the other day. I think that's a bit too much. But Fire Emblem is another example. You mentioned before about an RPG with, you know, your mum, your dad, and your kids, which
Yeah.
I agree sounds pretty cool. But Fire Emblem starts becoming too much of a dating sim,
Right.
where you kind of have to find out what the characters like to sort of essentially slip in bed with them to be able to have a kid in the first place to
Right.
get the characters you need. And it's like,
Yeah.
this is really gross. You know,
Yeah.
I'm playing an RPG where I'm doing all these tactics and trying to stop the big bad, and here I am trying to hit on this purple haired chick because I think that might let me have the best character for my son. You know, it's a bit,
Yeah. I know what you
and
mean.
to do that, I've got to find out what your favorite cake flavor is. You know,
I
it's
think.
not.
Yeah. I think. Like, it's not a JRPG, but it is an RPG to some. Well, it is an RPG. I think one game series that does that really well is definitely Mass Effect.
Yes.
That kind of makes you don't have to. You don't get like a necklace for some random character, and they're like, "Oh, sleep with me." You know,
Yeah.
it's like,
You found my necklace.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of like it's more like you talk to them, you understand their feelings, you comfort them, you know, you do help them out, but their helping them out isn't as simple as get me this thing. It's always more personal than that, and I think
Yeah, and I find the conversations are written in a much more three-dimensional way. Like the characters are so varied that you can't just approach the, you know, the game is meant to be played as if you are the captain. So you're going to levitate towards certain characters depending on your own character traits yourself.
yeah,
But you can't attract necessarily everybody because they're completely polar opposites from one another. But aside from that, besides all the mechanics, they just feel human. Like they could actually exist, not somebody like you say who's. I love that example you've got. Like you found my necklace. Oh my god! You know,
yeah,
it's like, yeah, I don't really relate to this, and this is kind of creepy, and I think Persona, especially with the way that it's portrayed and the way it's done, I just don't care.
yeah,
You wear me out to the point where even my best friend, even my wife, you know, I couldn't be stuck in a room for 150 hours and do nothing but just talk to them
yeah,
about their day. You
yeah,
know, there has to be a point where I have to go. Can we please fight a boss now? You
yeah.
know. Can we please do that?
I find it funny with when you talk about romances. One of my favourite games is The Witcher 3, and there's two romance options. And
Right.
if you romance both of them, right, which you can do, you can sleep with both of them.
Yeah.
And if you sleep with both of them, they come up to you and they're like, "Oh, do you want to have a threesome?" And then the main character Geralt's like, "Oh, hell yeah!" And what they do is they both like act all seductive, and then they tie you to the bed, and then they just walk off. They just leave you there.
Yeah,
it's just
which is quite.
It's quite funny.
I respect Witcher.
Yeah,
but it's not something I've enjoyed playing. I don't mind watching it, but again, I just feel sometimes RPGs like that and others just sort of overstay their welcome. I've recently finished Tales of Arise, which is a series that I start with Symphonia on GameCube, and I haven't really touched a proper Tales game since Arise.
Yeah,
and Arise was pretty cool. I mean, it's a lot of style and no substance.
Right.
Where I find, although it wants you to believe that the story is great and it wants you to believe that the battle system is in depth, it's really more. Well, let's put it this way: imagine you go and you play Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
Why not? We're picking on that. We might as well pick on it again. Imagine you're playing Final Fantasy VII, but every single battle you're in, every battle, not just bosses, but every battle you play, you get to trigger all your limit breaks.
Right.
And you watch it. That's what Tales of Arise does to try and get past the fact that its battle system is very much just press one trigger or press one button because that does your combo. You build up these bars, you press them, and there's a lot of them, don't get me wrong, because they do them in combos. So whoever's in your party, they team up and they do a limit break together to sort of finish off a boss, and then you move on to the next character. But because there'll be like 10 enemies in a room, you'll see each of your limit breaks on each of those 10 enemies to move on to the next one. But regardless of that, it starts the game that way and adds a new one every so often. But about, I don't know how many hours I put into it. I was begging it for it to end. But there's a part where the game says, this is it. You know, do you want to go back? That infamous, do you want to go back? Because once you go through this teleporter, that's it. We're in the end game. It does that 4 times.
Oh, Jesus.
Right? And each time you think, well, this is naturally where the ending would be, because the story's all wrapped up. The boss is behind that teleporter or that door. This will be it. But what it does, which is absolutely horrible, is you step through the door, you have your fight with your boss, and then the story of the boss dying adds another chapter on top of it.
Right.
And then you go off and you go and do that. And it got so ridiculous, Mike, it actually took me into space. This is a fantasy RPG with knights and shields and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And actually went, now we need to give you another 10 hours, so you're in space. It's like, what? Why? If it just cut those 10 hours off, I would have been happy. You didn't need to put an extra chunk on the end of your game just for the clock, you know? And I think too many RPGs do that.
Well, like, I want to sort of, talking about The Witcher 3 and sort of cycling it back to sort of JRPGs. It's like, now, like, I think, like, The Witcher 3, I think the reason why I like it is because the side quests are, like, just as well written as, like, main quests in other games. The writing, I think, is incredible, but the problem is, which is also a problem with JRPGs, is one, the combat is very clunky, not the most enjoyable thing in the world, and two, there's just sub menu after sub menu after sub menu. If you want to craft one thing, it's like, well, you could craft this, but you need 2 of these. Now, how do I get 2 of them? Well, to get 2 of them, you have to craft 2 of these, but then you need this, and then you like.
Well, you got 2 things there. You've got menus and sub menus, which I totally agree with. I don't mind seeing a skill tree in a game.
No.
Especially if it's like Final Fantasy X. I thought the sphere grid was really cool. You can go too far with it, though, like when you're trying to get a platinum in that game.
Try and max it out, yeah.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
That the game is not designed for you to do that. I don't care what you say.
No.
But also, you've got crafting. Now, crafting, I find, is so terribly dull, and is such a way. I mean, there's some good examples. Don't get me wrong, but it's such a way of just padding out your game again and wasting your time. Where you could just go to a chest, open the chest, and there's a new sword. Yay!
Yeah.
But instead, the game wants you to go to 5 chests, pick up 1 item from each of those 5 chests, then go to a shop to craft them together and pay money, by the way, because it's not free, to be able to craft the weapon, which I could have got just in the dungeon. And I just think, especially when you start having to collect, trees and flowers and mushrooms and all that kind of stuff just to mix all these things together, what a waste of time. Just to add another. I don't care if some people will say it builds the world. It makes you feel like the world's more real.
Yeah.
For me, I can't help but say a game developer sat somewhere and has said, if I give that sword to somebody, they'll get that instantly. But if I build a crafting system, that'll mean that'll add an extra hour onto the clock again. Let's do that, because we want it to. It's not an RPG if it's not 120 hours, is it?
See, that's bad. But then you've got, like, when I tried to go do everything in Kingdom Hearts, where, yes, in Kingdom Hearts, I would have loved to pick a flower out of the ground and make myself a new wristband or whatever. But it wasn't, that would have been too cut and dry. It was like, oh, you have a 5% chance to get a random drop from this enemy that only respawns, only has like a 10% chance of actually spawning in that room. So you're like, walk in, oh, no, but I'm getting attacked by enemies, so I have to finish this encounter before I get out and go back in again. Nope, not there. Oh, and he's disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially if they're like those golden versions of the enemies that run away and
so
stuff.
Annoying. But I think that's one of the if you have any sort of RNG, randomness to your game, like, I ain't playing it. Like, I won't even touch, like, a casino in an RPG. Like, unless there's an easy way to cheese it, I just ain't even going to attempt it. I hate anything that's got a random sort of element to it, really.
Another game that I often forget, and I shouldn't because it's, like, in my top 10, is Tokyo Mirage.
Okay.
Which is the game they released on Wii U that they ported to the Switch.
Right.
And it's a mix between Fire Emblem and Persona.
Okay.
But it gets rid of a lot of the issues I had with both franchises.
Yeah.
Where, it has some of those random elements in it, but not to the point where it's a make or break for you to get to the end, because that chucks so much more stuff in there for you to do as an alternative.
Yeah.
So if you don't find that weapon or you don't get that drop, there'll always be something else you can level up instead to be able to get where you need.
Yeah.
And it has this fascinating thing. They did it in Final Fantasy IX as well, where you can get a new sword. But if you do get a new sword, you haven't fully leveled up your old sword, and you learn moves from your sword.
Yeah.
So do you get a new sword to get just a basic standing attack up, or do you stick with your previous sword to get that extra spell before you drop that sword forever and move on?
Yeah.
But it does it in such a way that's so fun and refreshing, because you can switch and change weapons whenever you want during battles as you play and things like that. It doesn't, again, get in the way of you enjoying that game and finding a way through it.
Yeah.
And the random chance of it just sort of dissipates after that, because you can buy everything generally from the shop. Enemies that are random. It's not like Persona where you're trying to catch them like Pokemon.
Yeah.
And then you level up 2 monsters and you put them together in the hopes that it's going to be the monster you want it to be, and if it's not, you got to catch those 2 monsters again.
Yeah.
You literally have these. Well, they are personas, which are based on Fire Emblem characters that look cool.
Okay.
But you're still playing. You're still playing a game that is going to respect your time you put into it. Plus, the characters in Tokyo Mirage, I'm sorry, a lot more interesting than anything in Persona. They might be singers, or they might be those kind of J-pop singers, and you have to watch concerts of them singing, and it's kind of like, oh, this is hardly masculine.
Yeah.
But at least they've got something going for them, rather than, I hope my homework's in on time. You know, that's a little bit more interesting to watch their careers progress than someone worrying about their science homework.
Well, I think there's a problem with, like, I mean, we'll definitely get into it at some point, but, like, there's a problem with the landscape of gaming today, which I think, and it was kind of a problem back then as well, but I think it's just sort of a problem in general. I think games, like, let's use Chrono Trigger for an example, right? There was a dungeon called the Singing Mountain that was in Chrono Trigger. Now,
right,
that the dungeon exists, quote unquote exists. The music for it exists. It's not in the game. Now, it got completely cut from the game,
right,
and the reason wasn't because of wasn't because they were in a rush. Wasn't because of anything else. The reason they cut it is because it was a really fun dungeon. They said the only reason they cut it is because they said it had absolutely no service to the story. Now, games need to have that level of. It's like with anything, even when you're making a video, you know, you think, right, this section is just completely useless, get rid of it. And I think games nowadays are so worried about. It's like the Metroid Dread controversy where people were going, "Oh, I'm not playing 50 quid for a 10-hour game or whatever it is." Like, that shouldn't matter. And I think I would rather have a concise game that's 20 to 30 hours. At least when it comes to RPGs, 20 to 30 hours, I think is a nice sort of length, and leave it at that, than try and pad it out for no reason. I think that's just a bit pointless.
Yeah, well, like, Panzer Dragoon Saga has stayed with me forever.
Yeah.
And someone said something interesting on a stream I was watching ages, where they said they paid £400 for Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Right.
£400 for a video game. And immediately I went, I would have not done that. But then someone said it's a forever game. And I had to think about what they meant by that for a while.
Right.
And Panzer Dragoon Saga, I have to admit, is a game that when I played, its music, its characters, its story, it's so unique compared to everything else out there that it has stayed with me forever. And it almost becomes like a kind of a measuring stick.
Yeah.
So when you think about it that way, if that game's going to stay with you forever, and you can play it over and over again, and I've played that game through like 6 times.
Yeah.
And every time I've enjoyed it constantly, and never thought it's gone by the wayside. I couldn't do that with a lot of the games that we've mentioned today, but that one has. But it's a short RPG. It's not. It literally they took an RPG and they trimmed all the fat off it. Its rival at the time was Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
Compared to on the Sega Saturn, this was the RPG for the Sega Saturn.
Yeah.
And where Final Fantasy VII, I often joke, it's not exactly true, but I often joke that the first disc is all right, but as soon as you get onto the second disc, it turns into a square Mario Party, where it's just literally nothing but mini games constantly back to back, and none of them are good. Whether it's you trying to do CPR on person, doing squats, trying to make a dolphin jump over a roof, or that god awful tower defense game with the triangle men.
Yeah.
All of that is even like the snowboarding and the motorcycle to a certain degree is just, it overstates its welcome.
Yeah.
At least Panzer Dragoon decided to go, do you know what, we could do that. We could pad it out and put all these pointless mechanics in, but we'll be a better game if we just keep to our original design and don't worry about that.
I think also things have changed mentally as we've gotten older, because like when we were kids, like you could sit down for like an 8-hour gameplay session and smash that out no problem. But now I feel like when I play a game, if I only have an hour, I want that hour to feel like I've done something meaningful. Yes. Whereas there's a lot of, like, I'm using a fast forward cheat sort of thing on an emulator when I'm playing Final Fantasy VI, for example, because I haven't got time to sit through all the animation. Same with I have to use the speed things on the PlayStation 4 versions of Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 9, like, because I just have not got the time to sit through all the animation and sit through all the random encounters. And when I play Chrono Trigger, Like, I played what was essentially a whole mission, kind of, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And a lot happened, and that was only 25 minutes of me playing. And if I were to do the same with a Final Fantasy game or a Dragon Quest game, I guarantee I wouldn't have got nearly as much done. And I think that's part of the problem.
I partially agree. I think Western RPGs are a lot more guilty of that than anything else.
I can understand.
If you sit down for a Western RPG and you've only got an hour, I don't think you'll see a different colour change in the background a lot of the time. But I do think JRPGs often do that a lot better. Some of the ones you've mentioned, maybe. I mean, there's a few dungeons in there, but I think Final Fantasy VII, when you play that for an hour, you see a fair amount of the game. I think Final Fantasy 9 and 10 also do that. 4 certainly does. And that's why I prefer things like 1 as well, because Final Fantasy 1 allows me because it's such a short RPG, you get and see a lot more of the characters and the monsters and such. But it's the other ones, like I've mentioned today, Skies of Arcadia, Grandia 2, and you've got to play these, Mike.
Yeah.
You got to. Bat and Chaos, any of those kind of things, Tokyo Mirage, you can sit down for an hour, and it allows you to play through that. It doesn't say, no, well, hang on, this part of the game's locked off because you haven't put enough hours in to level up your characters. It's a nice build for you to be able to continue on where you left off, or just focus on that. If you go off to the side and try and get more stuff, absolutely. You are rewarded with what you would expect in an RPG, more weapons, spells, secrets, whatever. But it's not compulsory. That's the word I'm looking for. It doesn't say, oh no, you only got an hour, go play your little sister's game instead, because you ain't going to get nothing done here. I
do think, to sort of play devil's advocate to sort of my own comments, I think there's kind of almost, I don't want to call it a Mandela effect, but there's almost like this thing with RPGs where people go, oh yeah, that game was like 60 hours long, and then you play through it and you're like, oh, that took me like 30 hours
half the time.
And they go, oh, that's you can play that, but that's like an 80-hour long game. And I go, me completely blind, like not knowing what I'm doing, will beat it in like 50 hours and go, well, what are you on about?
Well, that, and I think that Mandela effect you mentioned, also it's a kind of a cultural thing and an evolution thing, because when they were making games back on PlayStation 1 era, that we all thought those RPGs are the hardest, they go on forever, you can get your money's worth of those, and that's why they're so expensive these days. They were the first in their genre, especially over here in the UK.
Yeah.
So we didn't know how to play them. You know, fast forward 10, 15, 20 years, we've played a lot more RPGs now. You go back and play them, you kind of know what you're doing. Yeah. You're not going through that kind of training wheels phase. So suddenly the RPGs that you would have found hard because they were your first RPGs are not as hard anymore because you've had 10 or 15 under your belt.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally understand what you mean. And I'm some of those I'm going back to try. I want to try Suikoden at some point. Cause
I'm surprised you haven't played, because there's a friend of mine that I sort of met through the whole YouTube thing. He's the biggest JRPG fan I've ever met. Like he's literally at the minute currently playing through every single PS1 JRPG that you can find. Okay. Right, and then he's moving on to Sega Saturn, then he's moving on to PlayStation 2, so he's literally going through them all.
Jeez.
And he said one of his favourite Saturn games was, I think it was called Luna Eternal.
Luna, yeah, that's on my radar to play. Yeah,
and he said the sequel to that, he said, was one of the best games he's ever played. So
one of the fascinating things about the Sega Saturn, and this won't. Sorry, I apologise now, Mike, because it's the first time I've said it on this podcast, but it certainly won't be the last.
Yeah. Is
the Sega Saturn only had about 25% of its library released in English-speaking countries.
Right.
And now the general public and the fans of the Sega Saturn are actually translating the rest of the 75% of the library, and most of them are RPGs.
Yeah.
So I'm being exposed to new series that have originally designed for the Sega Saturn that are being released. So it's almost like getting a brand new game for an old retro system, which I can't get enough of. I love it. And Luna and Suikoden are, Secure Wars was released a couple of years back, and Link will Live Astoria, which I think that's an RPG. I haven't actually put it in the drive yet. But there's a lot of these games. Dragon Force 2, Shining Force 3. We got Chapter 1, but didn't get Chapter 2 and 3, and they've been translated. Right. All of those are being translated and re-released for us to sort of enjoy. So I'm picking those up, and it's exciting to sort of revisit those.
Yeah.
So Luna, like you mentioned, Suikoden, they're on my list, but I'm kind of waiting for the Sega Saturn release, because if you try and get one PlayStation, woo, boy, you'll be paying a lot of money.
Like Suikoden 1 and 2, I think, are PlayStation 1 games. But yeah. I think Luna, I could be wrong, but I think it was re-released on the PlayStation. But the problem is, this is a big problem with us as Europeans, is that Americans got the short stick compared to Japan. Now, we even got the short stick compared to Americans, especially when it comes to JRPGs. Because, like, on the SNES, for example, we got, like, nothing. First Dragon Quest we got was number 8. First Final Fantasy we got was 7. You know? All these other series, we didn't get Chrono Trigger until the DS in, like, 2006. We didn't, unless it was released on the PlayStation, unless we got that version.
What RPG did we get? Like... Because
there was Mystic Quest. Was it Mystic?
Yeah, but that's like a Zelda type game, isn't it? Yeah. Mystic Quest. I don't think that's even a turn-based RPG. PAL turn-based RPG. I'm going off script now.
There was one on the Super Nintendo that was called Final Fantasy, I think, but it wasn't a Final Fantasy. I think that was released in Europe.
Yeah, but again, that was more like Zelda, wasn't it? Like the over-top running hack and slash type thing.
I'm not sure.
But I mean, I don't remember there being many RPGs, if any, until Pokemon came along. Pokemon and Final Fantasy VII. But I then go back and look at all these retro channels and things and discover these games I've missed. And I'm often wrestling going, I don't remember Secret of Evermore. I certainly know Earthbound didn't make it over here.
No.
Super Mario RPG, that's another one we didn't get.
Well, Squaresoft were the worst for it. I don't care if you can't play the game in French and German. Just let us English people have it. You know what I mean?
Like, well, I know why, because I've gone into it over the Sega Saturn. But obviously, distribution is the main thing. Yes, you've got it in English because you've done it for American audiences, but do you distribute it just for our tiny little dot of an island when really that's the European region? And it like there's that complication, like you say, there's French, German, Spanish, and everything else involved. Plus, each of those countries has a different legality system about what can be in a game in the first place. There's a game, I don't know if this is true, by the way, but there's a game called Dark Savior on the Sega Saturn, which is kind of an RPG. It's a bit of a hybrid, but it's an isometric platformer.
Right.
Isometric 3D platformer, which is never easy. But when you go into a fight, it kind of goes into like a Street Fighter type one-on-one fighting game.
Okay.
So it's a bit odd. But they had to, when they translated that game, I was told that they trade chocolate, which was always a bit strange for me, because there were all these big burly Japanese RPG men that are talking about, stabbing each other and they're pirates and stuff, but they trade chocolate. Okay. Apparently, it turns out that was supposed to be tobacco.
Right.
But they changed it out for chocolate because of certain areas in the European area that won't allow it and wouldn't release it. So we all got labelled with chocolate instead of tobacco. Okay. And you can imagine the kind of complexities of an RPG where every single line of dialogue and what you collect and every item is scrutinised about whether that's okay. Even though, there's a thing in Paper Mario, I don't know if you know this, where I think it's Super Mario RPG, where you can go into Princess Peach's side desk.
Right.
Have you heard about this?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
And it's heavily implied that it's some sort of naughty little toy in her side desk.
Yeah.
How that slipped by, I have no idea. But that's the danger you run when you release an RPG in a different country, isn't it?
I think it's less of a problem now, but I think it's been quite damaging for RPGs as a whole in retrospect, especially in Europe where it's not as well known, because unless you've played if you didn't grow up with Final Fantasy VII, Pokemon is really, like today, Pokemon's really your only way to get into them.
Yes.
In a mainstream sense. So, like, it's kind of, which is a shame, because Pokemon sucks, man.
We're opening that can of worms, aren't we?
But, like, I don't know, like, there's so many...
Look, just to highlight, there was a time you liked Pokemon, though, wasn't there?
Not really.
Really? You never liked Pokemon?
Pokemon is like an abusive ex-girlfriend, in the sense that you look back and you go, oh man, those were good times, and then you go, okay, let's just try and meet up for coffee, see how it goes, and then you meet up for coffee, you make a couple jokes, and then she comes out with something, and you go, wait, I've never liked you. Why am I here? Why am I sitting here right now? It's the same with Pokemon.
I could be doing something else.
I'll go, oh, you know what I feel like? I feel like playing a Pokemon game. 2 or 3 gyms in, I go, hang on. I don't even like Pokemon.
I play Pokemon under very strict conditions.
Right.
And to enjoy them, because I gutted through up until Black and White. I didn't play Black and White, but whatever the game was before Black and White, I stopped playing Pokemon because I didn't think they changed enough.
No.
And then what they did add just didn't, make me want to play the game. But my favourite ones are Gold and Silver, the remakes of Gold and Silver. But I say that under an asterisk, because I will... And I'm not ashamed of this, but it's the only way I can enjoy this game. I will start the game using an action replay to make sure that I can start with a Sandshrew, because he's my favourite Pokemon.
Right.
Because it takes so long to get a Sandshrew in the game to put, and that's the one I really want to get to. I base my whole team around that Pokemon.
Yeah.
And then when I start getting into HMs and sort of trying to, using cut to get through certain puzzles, you poison a Pokemon by putting on an HM, because you can't take it off them unless you go to a certain place. Yeah. So there's something on the action replay that makes you unlearn HMs once you've used them once. Right. So I don't have to, go back to the Pokebox, pull out some Pokemon that can learn cut down that bit of grass, and then go back, because I've got 5 members of my team, because the 6th slot is taken up by that Pokemon prostitute that just has the HMs, and that's all I use him for.
Right.
It just again wastes your time, but there's a way round it, so I don't mind it so much.
I mean, Heart Gold Soul Silver is funnily, like, I say this because I just don't. I don't know what's wrong with me.
You don't believe yourself.
But, like, Heart Gold Soul Silver, I've actually beaten everything, including the post game, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which I will admit, best post game in a Pokemon game, hands down. Like, being able to revisit a completely different region. But I think, like just to be somewhat brief, the thing I hate...
If you're listening to the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, I just have to try and describe the grimaces on Mike's face as he's trying to fight through these sentences. They're pretty explicit.
Hey you! Yeah, you! Do you like video games? Do you like kick-ass characters? Do you like action and adventure? Then you should go to RagingDestiny.com and get your copy of Raging Destiny, an action-packed fantasy fiction today. A novel written by a gamer for a gamer. That's right, written by me, Bill, from Pop Culture Pause Screen. It's a non-stop thrill ride with in-depth characters that very well could be your next favourite franchise. There isn't any slowing down in this book, oh no! Every chapter is designed to keep you reading and wanting to know what happens next. You can find out more at RagingDestiny.com, and I thank you in advance for your support. Now, back to the show.
Pokemon is a great concept. Like, a great concept. You catch monsters, you make them fight other monsters, and, you you go through all these tournaments and stuff, and you become the best monster trainer. Conceptually, it's great, but first of all, you've got the story's the same in all of them. You're in a little town. Your mum's like, oh, dad's dead or he's gone or whatever. You're 10. Go out into the world, and then you go to a lab to meet Professor Tree, who's like, here's 3 Pokemon, a grass one, a fire one, and a water one. Pick one. And then you're like, well, I want that one, but not them two. And then your rival goes, well, I'll have that one then. And then you go through. There's some plot about a legendary Pokemon. You go through 8 gyms, and then you go fight a champion who's at the end of 4 different members of the Elite Four, and it's all the same. And that's one.
You forgot about the mandatory bird Pokemon. There's always a mandatory bird Pokemon area.
But like, this is another thing, right? Not only have you got your random encounters, which are never fun. Not only, you've got all these other problems. Not only are the routes are just blandly designed, and the dungeons are mostly either irritating or annoying. Not only have you got the HM problem, but instead of like fixing any of these issues, they go, well, we've got 100 brand new Pokemon designs for you to enjoy in a brand new region against a rival team with a different name. And I'm like, who cares? Who's the most popular Pokemon? Who's the mascot of Pokemon? It's Pikachu, right? Okay. Yeah. What other Pokemon do you think of? You might think of Charmander. Oh, Charmander. Everybody loves Charmander. You might think of Jigglypuff. You might think of Mewtwo, right? Who cares about Pokemon from Gen 8? Nobody does.
Look, I got 2 things to say on this point. I made that mistake on Twitter quite recently, right?
Yeah.
There's a dog Pokemon that is. It looks just like Growlithe. It might be an expansion of Growlithe. I don't know.
Right.
But I swear to God, it looks like what's those ice sweets? They're kind of like a biscuit, and they put like an ice.
Oh, midget gems.
Magic gems, right? No word of a lie. This Growlithe-looking mofo has an ice gem on its head and udders around its neck.
Right.
And I went, why is anyone liking this Pokemon? And I got absolutely hounded by 2 of my friends who went, he looks great because he looks like a legendary dog Pokemon and stuff. And I'm like, whoa, okay, fair enough. I'm wrong. I honestly thought I was in the majority, but I'm not. There's people who do look forward to those new Pokemon that come out, and they really enjoy it. Secondly, just as a friend from me to you, Mike, you do at the moment sound like Lisa from that episode where she tries to convince people not to buy the new Barbie doll, and then Smithers goes, yeah, but she's got a hat. And then they all buy it. It's like, Mewtwo's got a hat. I have to have Mewtwo with a hat.
But I think it's less of a... It's more of a... I'm not one of those people who swears by the first generation of Pokemon and thinks that's where the series peaked, because I think that's a load of crap. But I think it's more so a problem of what's the point of making 100 new designs of Pokemon that nobody cares about when you could work on making better visuals, making more interesting level design, making better animations for the Pokemon you've got, and then the fans, right? This rabid fan base go, why can't we have all 1,000 Pokemon in this game? Like, because they keep adding more.
Too many.
In 10 years' time, they'll be going, well, they haven't added all 2,533 Pokemon to the game. I ain't playing it. Well, what do you expect when you want more Pokemon?
Yeah, but the problem is that the Pokemon company are filled with designers rather than game developers.
Yeah.
So the reason their games look the way they do and they haven't changed for so long is because it wouldn't surprise me if they're still using a variation of the same engine they've had for years. But you see, they've put more money into turning it into a franchise, lunchboxes, t-shirts, movies, designing new Pokemon for cards, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
The game, essentially, they feel the Pokemon will sell itself. So therefore, they don't really change anything as a result. But people are starting to realise, aren't they?
I think there's more... The problem is, for me, is how much promise there is in content outside of...
Absolutely.
Like the spin-offs and stuff as well. Like the stories are great in the Mystery Dungeon games. The animations and stuff are great in your say what you want about the games themselves, but your games like in terms of the animation and how the Pokemon look, games like your Colosseums and your those sort of lines.
I love playing Pokemon Colosseum, seeing my Pokemon in 3D for the first time and just going through all the gym battles again. I loved it. It was brilliant.
But I think like Pokemon Snap as well is another example where the animations look beautiful and the lighting was so much better, and it's kind of like it's a little bit sad. It's also sad in the sense that you have all these JRPGs that have promise, and yet Pokemon takes all the spotlight despite putting in barely any effort. Like people like, if people are obsessed with like a Suikoden or like your old Final Fantasies or people love like Shin Megami Tensei and things like that, and I think it's a shame because those fans are not. Obviously Shin Megami Tensei 5 recently came out, but like, what if someone like me likes Chrono Trigger? You've got nothing.
He's one of those, ladies and gentlemen. Where's my Chrono Trigger 2?
But like, it's just weird how.
Give me Mother 3.
Even stuff like Final Fantasy. Like, how many more Final Fantasy 7s do we need?
See, I don't get that so much. I don't think. I think Final Fantasy 7 hasn't milked as much as what people say it is, and I know that's probably hard to digest because you think, well, what are you on about, Bill? It had a third-person shooter. There was a mobile game. They got 2 movies. Fair enough, but I think because it's that landmark thing, you don't judge things like Halo for doing the same. Because it had a RTS and it's got several animes and movies and comics. It's a franchise, is what it is. But I think there is a turn happening, and it happened with the Wii, believe it or not, where people thought RPGs were too much trouble.
Yeah.
And that there was already RPGs well established, and it wasn't worth the effort trying to get a new one off the ground, because if you weren't Final Fantasy or Pokemon, people didn't care.
Yeah.
But there was people in the UK who translated Xenoblade Chronicles when no one else was going to do it, and they did it on a budget. And because of that, we got a PAL release of Xenoblade Chronicles, and America didn't get it. So it was almost like the reverse of what happened on the Super Nintendo, where we were starting getting RPGs. And I've got over there somewhere, I've got a coin collection even where they would like milked it and went, America, you haven't got it, but we're also giving coins to these people for buying the game. And there was a massive petition for them to release the game in the country just to say, look, we want these games. It is not a risk. Give us a chance to do it. And things are starting, like Persona has been running for so long, but it wasn't really until Persona 5 that it took off.
No, not really.
And it's a massive franchise that's been going for years and years. Altelia. There you go. That's showing my knowledge of video games. Altelia is an alchemy game that's been going since the Super Nintendo, I believe.
Yeah.
And there's like, I don't know, 30 games in the series. And it's not until recently that again people have picked up and gone, what's this? Why have I not heard of this? And it's the goodwill of people saying, this is different and we want different, this is good, that has actually started spreading out, and people are now starting going, maybe I should translate this is worth my time.
Well, like, look at the outrage of Hero from Dragon Quest being in Smash. Everyone's like, he doesn't deserve to be in Smash, what is it? And then you look into it and you go, this series literally created the JRPG. Like, there's literally... This
series is older than I am!
Like, there's literally, like, not that many more series worth of the legacy, but until Dragon Quest, I know 8 sort of got a lot of, like, 8 kind of got the RPG fans into Dragon Quest, whereas 11 I feel like got the mainstream into it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
But like, going back to the point about Final Fantasy 7 and you talking about how it's a franchise, for me, yes and no. I think the point, like, if I could put it into a different franchise for context, it would be like if they made about 5 different spin-offs of Pokemon Black and White, and there was no No, and they didn't focus on any other. There was like they did nothing to do with Kanto or Johto. I mean, people are kind of a bit done with Kanto. That's probably a more apt comparison. But I think it's not so that Final Fantasy VII is getting so much love that people are frustrated by. It's more so that other games in the franchises like 4, 6, 9 are getting nothing at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I still stand by that Final Fantasy VI is the game amongst all other games that needs to be remade more than anything else on the planet. Because I feel the only thing that's holding back Final Fantasy VI from being a good game was the console it was on, the graphics engine it was running in, and even things like the music. The Super Nintendo did some great stuff with music. Look at Donkey Kong Country and things of that nature. But it needs a proper orchestrated soundtrack. And there's so much that game needs a remake for. Not so much Final Fantasy VII. I loved Final Fantasy VII Remake up until the point where you climb that friggin' wall and go to the laboratory. I hated the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Up until that point, I was like, oh my god, I've turned into a Final Fantasy VII fan, because I loved it. I thought it was so good. Yeah. But as soon as you climb that wall, it turned into a game. It turned into Kingdom Hearts for me, and I hated it.
No, I agree.
But as much as that was a good game, and people wanted a remake of Final Fantasy VII, and John from OLL Games, shout out to you, John. Go buy your tickets for the conference. Links in the description. I would basically say Final Fantasy VII is a game that everyone was asking for.
Yeah.
And the new ones that are coming up will probably make the ending better. But I still stand by the fact that Final Fantasy VI deserved a remake more, because then that would be the best RPG on the planet if they did that.
I think there's also we talk about a shift in culture. I think people are. I think it's a net positive. People are moving away from the idea that, like, for example, look back at the N64 era. PlayStation dodged this a little bit, but not quite to the same extent. But definitely with the N64, it was. So, what are we doing for our sequel to our game? 3D. Oh, how are we going to remake this game? 3D. How are we going to? Yeah. Everything is like, you talk about Pokemon went 3D, and I think Zelda is a good proof of concept that I think. It's the same with Mario as well. I think there is room for both. I don't see why... Like, if they were going to remake a Final Fantasy VI, or they were going to remake a Chrono Trigger, or anything like that, I don't necessarily think a 3D remake would work. I'd instead want a 2D remake with quality of life changes that has... Because if you look at, like, the PSP or PS1... like, the sprite art in those games are fantastic. Like, you brought Final Fantasy 1 and 2 remakes.
Are really well made on the PSP.
They look better than the new than the Pixel remasters that you can get on Steam.
They do.
And so I think what they're doing with Dragon Quest 3, I think that looks quite good. I think if you're gonna, like, one thing I like about the cultural shift that we're having is that I think games, especially with how much indie games have sort of blown up over the years, I think now there's become room for both. Whereas now you can have your 2D RPGs like your Octopath Travelers, or the new Sea of Stars or whatever, but you can also have your Final Fantasy 16s or your your Dragon Quest 11s. There's room for both, and I think that's sort of the ideal scenario. So I think when it comes to, you say Final Fantasy VI deserves a remake, the last thing I'd want is for them to go all 3D and all open world and try and sort of go out that way, because I honestly can't think of a 3D remake that hasn't stuck extremely close to the source material that's actually sort of worked.
I think the only reason I feel this way is because I played Final Fantasy IV on the DS.
Right.
Which is literally what you've described. It's a 3D remake of a 2D RPG.
Mm-hmm.
And the voice acting, I think they did a good job. The soundtrack, they did a great job. And although on the the box art and the opening FMV sequence, all of it is these adult characters that are well, proper proportioned, and they look real. Inside the game, they're very similar to the characters in Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
Kind of blocky with triangular hands and feet.
I've never really liked that sort of chibi look, to be completely honest.
No, but I felt for Final Fantasy IV it worked really well because it's on a DS.
Mm-hmm.
I just think something like that, because I just fell in love with that game. I couldn't believe this was a game that no one was talking about.
Yeah.
When I was going through the series, and everyone's like, "Oh, you went 6 is the best, or 7." If that's the first one you played, the hardcore Final Fantasy fans would always say 6 was the best, and 10 was the other people. If you had a PlayStation 2, it's always the first one you played. But 4 was just so good for me, and it certainly wasn't my first RPG. But going back to what you were saying, I think 6, there's a world in 6 that's screaming out, that was just pushing the boundaries of what the Super Nintendo could show.
Yeah.
And I do think that would work in a 3D environment, especially just with the battle system alone. When those little GIF pixels come onto screen for a summon, and then they flash and they fly off, and they've not changed any animation. It's just literally that just is so underwhelming for me.
Yeah.
And even like the most impressive parts in that, where I forgot the name of the blonde character that sings the
Celeste,
opera. Yeah. All of that, I remember people saying to me, "Oh, that's so heartwarming, and that bit's so good, and that's so cinematic." Maybe back then because we didn't have anything, but now it's really awkward to look at. It's not a lot of fun at all.
Yeah.
So I feel if you could actually look down at a fully animated orchestra, that actually would have a lot more impact in that. And seeing the last boss, have you finished it yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, that last boss where you're kind of moving up this kind of column of, I don't know what it was, sin? All these kind of demons and things coming out of this body, wasn't it? It was like a real mismatch. Again, it's a solid image that doesn't move. Seeing that in 3D would blow my mind if they just did it right, and I'd be interested in seeing what it is. If it's a static image again, it'd be cool, but I don't know if it would answer my questions for that game.
I think more when I say 3D, I think I'm in terms of I wouldn't want it to look like a mobile game in a like a chibi sort of art style, but at the same time, I don't think Final Fantasy VI would work for like if you remade it like a Final Fantasy VII remake. I think what you'd have to do is it would be cool if they maybe mixed in some 3D elements into it. Like if, for example, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, a lot of the obstacles, a lot of the enemies and stuff that are coming towards you are 3D. Like you've got these books that will come out and attack you and stuff like that. And a lot of the big magic attacks and stuff you can do have like 3D elements to them. I think it sticks out a little bit like a sore thumb in Castlevania, but like that sort of thing of having 3D elements mixed in with sort of 2D elements, I think could work. Like with the DS remakes of the Dragon Quest games, for example, the sprites are 2D, but the buildings and everything, like the buildings, the things in the actual houses and all that is 3D.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, because admittedly, when you're walking across a world map or you're flying across in an airship, seeing that flat landscape is underwhelming.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I think there's a lot of scenes in Final Fantasy VI when you go to all of those locations, the planet blowing up, the bit where she turns into an Esper and flies over the land for the first time, and that kind of Mode 7 thing happens. Again, impressive for the time, I'm sure, but it's the expression of the characters, how dark the story is, because Final Fantasy VI has got a pretty dark story.
Yeah.
The expression of... I'm not doing well with names today, Mike. What's the name of the clown?
Kefka.
Kefka. His expression and scene... I played Dissidia on PSP, and he was one of the most interesting characters in that game in cutscenes because they had actually animated him in 3D for the first time.
Yeah.
And I just would like to see him be him in his own world, in his own game in 3D, because I just think that would work really well.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be disappointed with a 2D remake. I think that would be perfectly fine. The original proves that. If it just got rid of some of its horrible aged mechanics, I think you already done half the battle. But I do feel there's a 3D world in there that would just explode people's minds if they just give it more time, more so than Final Fantasy VII. Because once you get outside of the plates, out of Midgar, Final Fantasy VII doesn't really have too many amazing locales that kind of make you want to say, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing that in 3D. Because I don't know, I'm maybe you'll disagree, but the world map was pretty boring.
Well, I can imagine. I can imagine places like the Golden Saucer being quite interesting.
That's the exception, I'd say.
But like, yeah, I can understand what you're saying. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Final Fantasy Remake Part 2 just did away with the world map. And I think I guess my biggest reservation with a 6 remake would be the art style, because I think it's like I said, I'm not a fan of that sort of chibi style, and I think like Chrono Trigger, for example, did like full size sprites, so it wasn't, they didn't like, you know, make them small, and because I guess the amount of remakes I've seen has sort of burnt me a little bit, because I've seen some pretty sort of shoddy ones where they've tried to make it 3D and then they've just sort of made everyone like Diamond and Pearl remakes. I thought
they all look like
terrible.
pop figures.
I thought they all looked terrible.
They all look like pop figures, don't they?
But then on the 3DS they remade Ruby and Sapphire with, you know, normal sized 3D models, and it looks so much better. So I guess it's just a hard thing to do, but
do we need more RPGs, or do we need new franchises though? Maybe a question for another time on Pop Culture Pausecast.
Yeah, that's definitely a deeper discussion. I mean, I want to play Sea of Stars. That's a brand new franchise.
I'm looking forward to the. It's not the sequel to Octopath Traveler, but it's Triangle Strategy, I think it's called.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. Even though I said earlier in the podcast I don't like moving all my individual people, but it is from Octopath Traveler. I actually really enjoyed that game. Even I'm weird when it comes to games. I think I know what I like until something like Octopath Traveler comes along and says, "Yeah, you know that stuff you can play with. Here's a game full of it, but I know you'll like it." It's like, oh, that was a low blow. Keep the gloves up.
I always like to give a game a chance anyway, even if it completely you know, but if an RPG can't grab me in the first 5 hours, then that's the game's problem. That's not my problem.
Well, that's the hardest thing. I think Skies of Arcadia is guilty of that, in the way that I always call it the gold knight boss syndrome, where I hated Skies of Arcadia, and I think it was about, like you say, about 4 or 5 hours in, and then what it would do is drip feeding me mechanics every so often. It was let me play the game with no real story or consequence, and then it gave drip feeding me mechanics. And then there was this bit where you have to go against this gold knight boss, and he killed me, and I was like, what? And then I realised that was the point where the training wheels were off, and this gold knight was your test to make sure you've been paying attention for the last 5 hours.
Okay.
And then after that, the whole game took off. So now I do have to give give RPGs a chance, but finishing Tales of Arise was a real struggle, because I knew 5 hours in it wasn't going to get any better, but it's on the list and I got to do it. You know what I mean? So I sort of bought it, but.
Well, here's something to sort of try and make it all come full circle, right?
Go on in.
So, if you were to pick 5 JRPGs, right, that you want to go away and play, what would they be?
Are you saying as if I've played them before?
You haven't, no.
I haven't played them before.
What are you going to expand your gaming knowledge with and go away and play? Or maybe a game that you didn't give a chance that you kind of want to fully invest in?
Wow, that's a deep question to end a podcast on, Mike. What are you doing to me? If you said what I had played, I could definitely name that. What I haven't is a struggle. So I've tried quite a few of them. Oh yeah, I do want to try Dragon Quest 3, even though I've not liked any other Dragon Quest that have come along.
Okay.
I'm hoping, because it's the newest one they're doing, that they'll put something in there that will modernize it to some degree to allow me to enjoy it. There's a few on the Sega Saturn that are coming out and being translated, but I can't pronounce the names.
Right.
It's like Woohoden or something like that is one of them. Right. I'd need my gaming app to try and word what they are and what's coming up.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, they're there. There's some ones on PlayStation. Well, I'm going to answer this question properly, just because you've completely blindsided me in this. I'm going to answer this question properly. Give me a second. Okay. Right. So here's my list then.
Okay.
Voice of Cards.
Okay.
The only reason I haven't got that yet is hopefully there's going to be a physical release. Right. Yes, I am that person. Valkyria Chronicles.
Okay.
Just because I like the idea of it, because it's very similar to what do you call it? Mario versus Rabbids Kingdoms.
Oh, okay.
But
I like that game.
Instead of there being kind of, you get into a location and then press attack, you actually almost play like a third-person shooter on your go.
Right.
So that sounds quite cool. The Trails in the Sky series, or what some people may know as Phantom Brave, which keep popping up. It's one of those little-known PS2, PSP franchises.
Right.
I know very little about them, but they're always on the people's list of top 10 RPGs if you really dig deep.
Yeah.
So what's that? That's free, isn't it? Magna Carta. I have nothing to add to that.
Right.
It's just an RPG that was on there that came out around about Lost Odyssey time and Infinite Undiscovery.
Okay.
They're around about that time, so I picked that up. And I'm going to give you Secret of Evermore.
Okay.
Because you can play as a dog. You got like a little dog companion.
Oh, that's it then. It's set.
That's it. What about you?
So, I think I think my choices would be a lot more mainstream. Clearly, you've played a lot more than I have, but I'd have to say. An honourable mention is I want to actually finish Dragon Quest XI because I haven't finished it yet. I'm only about 20 hours in. But in terms of games I haven't played, Final Fantasy IV. I want to try Final Fantasy Tactics because it often crops up in top 10 Final Fantasy games. I also want to try Ni no Kuni.
Okay.
That's made by the company Studio Ghibli, who make like Spirited Away and all that sort of thing. I also want to try. Another honourable mention would be Nier Automata. I also want to play Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door.
Oh, that's a classic.
I want to try. I'm not going to say I'm going to beat it, but I'm going to attempt Persona, though I can't say I'm going to commit to it. I want to at least say that I've tried it. I also want to play at least the ones that are considered good in the Suikoden series, which seems to be the first two. Because there's a lot of JRPG fans that would say that Suikoden 2 is one of the best ever made.
Yeah, I've
so
heard
I want to see what that's all about. And finally, I don't know how many I've said.
You said quite a lot.
And finally, Xenoblade Chronicles.
Yes. The first one.
Yes.
Leave the second one alone for now.
I'll leave the second one alone. I'll leave that for all the creeps who like...
Well, as you've just gone and done some honourable mentions, I didn't know we were going down that far. I'll chuck a few more in there that are on my to-do list. Albert Odyssey.
Okay.
Is one I've got on the list there. Parasite Eve.
Oh, no, I want to try that, yeah.
Rogue Galaxy I originally bought on PS2, which looks very similar to Skies of Arcadia in its presentation, but I don't know about that. But there's a couple on here that I've tried maybe for a few hours and think again, it's like what you said with Pokemon, where I tried them, I go, I don't like this game, and then you put it down and go, well, maybe I should ask her out for a coffee again. Resonance of Fate, which is that gun wielding RPG you may have seen on the Xbox 360,
right,
where they flip over characters and shoot guns. Secret of Mana, and Vagrant Story.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Vagrant Story. I've tried Secret of Mana, but I could never get into it.
Yeah, I'm the same. Those games I've mentioned there, I played them for a little while. And Vagrant Story, I'll give an example. Because everything is very black and beige, it didn't really attract me, especially when I was playing some of my favourites, which are Grandia 2, which is super colourful, and Skies of Arcadia, which again is a great world. I think it was kind of lost on me. Plus, it was so dug down in its mechanics that it didn't give me a very good first impression. But I need to give it more time.
Secret of Mana is kind of a product of its time because it's like a action RPG before action RPGs became commonplace. So it's kind of like, why would I play Secret of Mana when I could play literally any other action RPG? And not just that, but the characters are extremely one note, and there's only 3 party members, including your bland main protagonist. So it never really struck a chord with me personally.
No, again, I felt the same. That's why I stopped playing it. But there was a remake recently, and it makes. Although some people say the remake's not very good, it does speed things up.
Trials is apparently a better game. The
sequel, and I've heard that too. But because those characters keep coming up on people's YouTube channels, and there's that nostalgia linked to it, I feel that there's a gap in my knowledge that I want to fill.
That's fair enough.
Yeah. Right, well, I think we've covered everything we can.
I think we've ran out of things to cover, to be honest.
I don't think we can say anything more. I guess it's over to you guys in the listening audience to add to our conversation so we can perhaps bring this up again in the future on the future episode of Pop Culture Pausecast.
And hopefully, down the line, we'll actually have more knowledge and played more games. But they are very long games, so give us a chance. I
would love to hear your thoughts on Grandia 2, Panzer Dragoon Saga, and Skies of Arcadia. I know those games are not easy to get hold of. Well, except for Grandia 2. Grandia 2 you can get hold of quite recently now.
You can get hold of any game if you know where to look.
Play it anywhere you can.
You can play it without spending any money.
Well, I would like to hear your thoughts, especially on your
I definitely show. Now that you brought them up, I was looking at best lists today for JRPGs, and I've seen Skies of Arcadia show up a few times. So
it's a big commitment. Not as much as a commitment as you've done in your recent videos, but Skies of Arcadia is a bit of a big one. Yeah. But I would like you to tell us more about it in a moment, Mike. But I'd love to hear it on Nostalgia. I think that would be a great game for you to cover.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Thanks for listening to the Pop Culture Pausecast. Check the channel for other episodes, new podcast every Wednesday. Or, if you're one of the cool ones, you can watch some of my other videos right here on Pop Culture Pause Screen, or maybe catch me live on Twitch every Monday from 7 PM UK time. And show some love to my partner in crime, Mike, over at his YouTube channel, Mike Ritiques. Link in the description. He does some great game reviews, he really does. And if you want some action, adventure, and kick-ass characters in your life, then go over to RagingDestiny.com and get a copy of my book, Raging Destiny, a novel for gamers written by me, a gamer. You won't regret it, and I appreciate your support. That's RagingDestiny.com. You should have links to all of this in the description below, or on screen now for you to click. But for now, it's time to stop talking and go play some bloody video games. Catch you next time.